Hi friends, this is your hostess Day-lin with a brand new episode of It's Really a Podcast. With Halloween coming to an end and November now here in all its glory, the anniversary of my favorite TV show has occurred, and I feel like I want to celebrate that in this episode. And if you don't know what that show is, it is one that is very near and dear to my nostalgic heart, and that is, of course, Disney's Gargoyles. So get ready for an episode filled with drama, romance, animation history, and a whole lot of jalapenos. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of It's Really a Podcast. So before we get into this week's main topic of our episode, I want to at least start off by talking about a few important things to me. And first and foremost, the election happened. It was terrible. I hate the person that won, and I'm still immensely upset and terrified for our country. That is my statement that I will stick to, and that we continue to be a disappointment to those who deserve our protection and our safety within this country. And another disappointing thing that happened on a Wednesday, almost exactly a week after, is the announcement, even though obviously this is funny and not something that is deeply upsetting like the thing I just mentioned at the beginning of this, is the winner of People Magazine's Sexiest Man Alive. Now, I've decided that because of this gravely important topic in our American culture, that I'm going to do an entire episode about it. But regardless, let me just get this out of the way. It has been announced that John Krasinski, the guy that you might know from things like The Office and A Quiet Place and his Good News show, which I have a whole diatribe about, is the winner of this year's coveted spot of People Magazine's Sexiest Man Alive. And in my humble opinion, I think that is bullshit. Because, first of all, I think that People's Sexiest Man Alive is always like a thing that kind of is like a cultural, for lack of a better word, milestone, or a moment that of the zeitgeist that's captured of explaining what we are culturally into in terms of sex appeal and whatnot. And, or at least that's what I originally thought it was, until I would say maybe the last like 4 years or so, because with the exception of Idris Elba and Michael B. Jordan, who are like two top picks. Love it. Paul Rudd is also an exception because, you know, he's a classic. Love him forever. He's kind of like a cardigan sweater. You can't go wrong, right? Every other pick has been immensely questionable. Adam Levine, Blake Sheldon, Patrick Dempsey, which, like, again, isn't like a questionable pick overall. But it definitely rings to me as something that just doesn't feel quite genuine and also feels very dated in its choice. And John Krasinski absolutely falls within that. Not only is this like not having anything to do with any like current movies or things that are coming out in the next few months, but John Krasinski is just kind of faded into the spotlight. And maybe they did this because, like, you know, his PR team decided to buy him this slot so that he could become more culturally relevant again outside of his directing gigs that he's done, like for the movie If, which I have my own set of problems about. But when you take that out of the equation, there's nothing about John Krasinski that makes him an interesting pick for this choice. And that makes him an interesting pick for this position. And in my personal opinion, I feel like there were 3 obvious candidates that should have been Sexiest Man for 2024. And those are, in no particular order, Jonathan Bailey, because Wicked is coming out, and like clearly he would have been an amazing pick and also been the first gay man on the cover, so that would have been incredible. Aaron Taylor Johnson, who has always deserved this this slot and this title, but he just hasn't gotten, his flowers ever. And obviously the Kraven the Hunter movie needs some desperate marketing, like big time, huge. And then the other one is Pedro Pascal, who also has been deserving of this award for many years now, but he is coming out with not only Gladiator 2, but The Last of Us Season 2. So I don't know what was going on. Like, honestly, even if they had picked Glenn Powell, who's, like, not my favorite person in the world, I also would have absolutely understand that because he was super sexy in Twisters. And he also is just, purely Americana hotness to a huge population of people. So, yeah. Those are my thoughts, and you'll be hearing more about them very soon since I will be doing an episode about People's Sexiest Man Alive. Perhaps that'll be next week's episode. Who knows? So, yeah, that's the news, as terrible as it is.
1,000 years ago, superstition and the sword ruled. It was a time of darkness. It was a world of fear. It was the age of gargoyles. Stone by day, warriors by night. We were betrayed by the humans we had sworn to protect, frozen in stone by a magic spell for 1,000 years. Now here in Manhattan, the spell is broken, and we live again. We are defenders of the night. We are gargoyles.
On October 24th of 1994, a very significant and beloved TV series debuted on the Disney afternoon programming block on the Disney Channel and many other channels later on. It became a show known for its mature subject matter, immensely important themes, multi-dimensional characters, and fascinating twists and turns. The show was, and will forever be known as Disney's Gargoyles. Created by a variety of people, including Greg Weisman, who you might know for his work on Young Justice, Gargoyles tells the story of a clan of creatures in medieval Scotland, whose main goal is to protect the castle they reside on top of. During the day, they rest as stone statues, but at night they come alive and use their strength to right wrongs and challenge evil. But after being cursed to remain as stone forever, they eventually find themselves in modern day, aka 90s era New York City, thanks to the efforts of a handsome billionaire known as David Xanatos, played by Star Trek The Next Generation's Jonathan Frakes, aka Riker. And, he also just so happens to put their castle on top of a New York skyscraper. That's how all this happens. Now in Manhattan, the clan's leader, Goliath, played by Keith David, finds himself confused as to how to handle his new home. Yet when he encounters Detective Elisa Mazza, played by Sally Richardson, his world, along with the rest of the Gargoyles, changes and gives them a new goal: to protect the people of the city and to fight against any antagonist who stands in their way. The rest of the series then follows the adventures of the clan and Elisa as they discover the truth behind Xanatos' motives, encounter other nefarious foes, meet other gargoyles around the world, along with being reacquainted with figures from their past. This includes iconic characters such as Demona, played by TNG's Marina Sirtes, who just also happens to be Goliath's ex-lover and now sworn enemy of the Manhattan clan. There's also Coldstone, played by TNG's Michael Dorn, a Gargoyle clan member who has been turned into a cyborg Frankenstein-like creature and basically has multiple gargoyle personalities within him. There's also Macbeth, a human who has been hunting the gargoyles down, specifically Demona, and has a close personal tie with her that may or may not have to do with a magical curse. All of these characters and so many more become iconic and important antagonists and figures within the the story. But I would say those are the ones that, to me, are the standouts for sure. As the show progresses, we also get to see the inclusion of familiar tropes and characters from William Shakespeare's famous works, including Puck from Midsummer Night's Dream, along with other important folk tales and mythology from all over the world. There's also romances, family drama, high-stakes adventures, and a time-shifting river, and of course, New York shenanigans. Now that we got the plot description out of the way, I want to talk about how I was first introduced to Gargoyles. So while a lot of people watch Gargoyles for the first time on TV, I actually watched Gargoyles for the first time via the VHS tape release of the first, I think, 5 or 6 episodes combined into a movie.
Just out on video, a great new movie with the hottest action heroes ever. Let's go! Gargoyles, the movie. Now you can own the story of how the legend began.
What are you?
Humans call me Goliath. Once they guarded a kingdom. Now, they must protect New York from Xanatos and the Steel Clan. Gargoyles, the movie.
And that was an experience that even to this day, as a 34-year-old adult, I find so immensely epic in every way possible. First of all, just for, context, when you got this VHS tape, it was in this really cool kind of like paper case that had this really interesting art that I feel like I've never seen the Gargoyles as a set of characters depicted in, where they kind of were like brightly colored, but it also looked like they kind of were like almost hyper realistic. They had this like really interesting shading around them, and they were also like a smidge creepy. I highly recommend Googling the Gargoyles, the movie VHS tape cover, and I'll put it in the show notes too so you can see it. But really, truly, they don't look at all like they do in the TV show on that cover. So I think that was a little bit of false advertising, and maybe it was meant to make them look friendlier, but I don't necessarily think that does, even though overall the cast of Gargoyles, the lead cast, is a pretty friendly crew. But, when you have that visual as a child, and then you pop in the VHS tape, and not only do you get a trailer for Super Samurai Cyber Squad, aka Gridman, which we could do a whole episode about that later on, but you also get this epic trailer, or a couple of trailers for Gargoyles itself.
1,000 years ago, superstition and the sword ruled. It is an age of darkness. It is an age of fear. It is the age of Gargoyles.
One of them was this very cool kind of behind the scenes featurette that lasted maybe like a minute, if not less. And Jonathan Frakes introduced it as, kind of in Xanatos cosplay, because he, in real life, he does look like Xanatos minus the ponytail. And he, is standing on like this really cool, like, city skyscraper set. And he is, kind of getting into character of being epic and, making the show feel so grandiose, mature, and adult.
I'm Jonathan Frakes, one of the actors helping to bring the new animated series Gargoyles to life. I play David Xanatos, the rich and powerful businessman who seeks to exploit the might of the Gargoyles.
Yes.
For his own purposes.
And you just got this feeling that what you were about to watch was something that was not the same kid entertainment that was coming out at that time. You absolutely got that feeling. And even me as like a 5 or 6 year old, I immediately got that feeling for this show. So they do that little featurette. You get to see Keith David and Sally Richardson and Marina Sirtis have like tiny little interview clips, and they look so young. It's so cute.
My name is Keith David, and I play Goliath.
You're awake. You're alive. We're together again.
Here we are in the 21st century.
And they show like some of the animation process, and Greg Weisman's in it for a little bit. And then they also show a trailer for the Gargoyles game. And all those things at the same time combined just got you pumped for this show. And so then what was on the VHS tape was a compilation movie edited version of those episodes. And because I, at the time as a kid, didn't realize that they were separate episodes that then had missing pieces that I had to later watch later on as an adult or a teen. It was really mind-opening in a lot of really interesting ways to be presented it in that way. But the animation felt so grandiose and beautiful and amazing, especially then when my brain, as an adult later, connected that the reason why I loved watching that animation so much is because those first couple of episodes were animated in Japan. And as someone who very much simultaneously at the time that I started watching Gargoyles was around the same time I saw My Neighbor Totoro and Sailor Moon, and those things obviously became my introduction into anime and changed my life forever. So, all those things are, it's fascinating to see the pipeline of how they are kind of in tandem and connected that way, right? And then after the movie version of the first couple of episodes plays, there's then a Gargoyles game. Now, I have never been able to find this out officially, but I'm sure there's some Gargoyles forum that I just have missed finding out this information on. But in the game, it was a board game that came with the VHS tape. I lost every time, and the sound effects, again, I think, through the prism of my neurodivergent mind, were very scary and ominous to me. And I never wanted to play the game again. And I'm pretty sure on the game, the video that went with the game after the movie, it set you up to lose. But I don't know if that was like always the case with everybody. So anyway, I just find that really interesting and a really fascinating marketing tool for sure. And I remember like I had all the little cardboard pieces that went with the game and all that stuff, and just, wow, pure nostalgia. And what a way to be introduced to this incredible show, right? So let's talk about why this is an incredible show and why this has remained something that has become my favorite show of all time.
We're probably the only couple in the park who don't have to worry about muggers.
So one of my favorite aspects of Gargoyles is how it represents a very underrepresented subgenre in the world of media. And for me, that category would be fantasies that take place in New York City. Now, some of you are going to understand exactly what I'm describing the moment I say that phrase, but some of you are also not going to understand what that means. So let me give you a little bit of some examples that might trigger your brain and have you realize the possibilities of this very specific subgenre. So the one that remains the most nostalgic and comforting to me aside from Gargoyles is my other favorite comfort show, which will get its own episode in the future, and that is the 1987 TV series of Beauty and the Beast starring Linda Hamilton and Ron Perlman, because there's just something about getting to see a world that's underneath the subway system of New York City that already has kind of like this mysterious, creepy, gothic quality to it that's grimy, but like has its own weird beauty to it at the same time, mixed together with a, humanoid creature man that is Vincent, and the romance and all that stuff. And then also some supernatural stuff that happens later on in the series, and magic and science and all that stuff mixed together that I think complements the mystery and the fascinating elements of New York City's history altogether. Then you have silly ones like, of course, A Troll in Central Park by Don Bluth, which is not necessarily a great movie, but it absolutely is a film that is a fantasy that takes place in New York City, and it involves Central Park, which also another one of my favorite movies that falls into this category, Enchanted, also primarily takes place in Central Park in many of its iconic scenes, of course, including How Does She Know? And, the moment in which Edward has the whole thing with the bikers, and he's singing, I've been dreaming, like that whole scene happens at Central Park. So those are, again, just some of my comforting examples and the ones that I think about. But I'm sure there's many other ones that you could list too. Like, there's Splash, which of course is another one that I love. And there's also Kate and Leopold. The list goes on and on from there. But in my personal, humble opinion, as a New York girl born and raised, I love Gargoyles the most out of any representation of this genre. Not only is there like an authenticity within this show of the like New Yorker East Coast energy that I feel like all these other examples I've given don't necessarily have 100%, but I feel like this show also is just such a beautiful love letter to New York, because the other examples I gave, while they do great moments and tributes to the great things in New York City, case in point, again, the Beauty and the Beast TV show I was talking about, I feel like Gargoyles, right next to Beauty and the Beast, is the closest thing to an actual tribute and love letter to the city that it resides in. One of the reasons why I say that in particular is because as a child growing up watching the show in the 90s, there were so many scenes that made me love the city even more as a child and made the city more magical to me every time I got to go, particularly to Manhattan, and get to see, you know, the Central Park statues of Alice in Wonderland characters. And that's a thing that's prominently featured in some of the first episodes of the series. In the scenes where Elisa Maza is fighting off Xanatos' men, you get to see her hide behind those statues. You also get to see some famous bridges where her and Goliath hide under. You also get to see, you know, the Statue of Liberty. You get to see Ellis Island. You get to see the East Village. Like, there's just so many great references there, like South Street Seaport even. Like, again, the list goes on and on from there. But there's just so many wonderful instances of getting to see New York City in such a beautiful, romantic way, brought to life with absolutely incredible animation all at the same time. So again, I love that aspect of it. But then also outside of just the visual references to New York, there's an authenticity and a love and a passion for New York City within the dialogue of the show, within the references baked into the names of the show. Obviously, the iconic younger trio of gargoyles is named after some iconic locations within New York City. Lexington, Broadway, and Brooklyn. Bronx, their gargoyle dog, and Hudson, obviously the elder gargoyle. They all take their names from New York City. And I think in a lot of ways they embody those areas to which their names come from. And that's just something that I find so enchanting and so much fun to watch as they develop as characters throughout the course of the show. Similarly, when you look at Elisa Maza and Matt Bluestone and a bunch of the other human characters, they really embody the areas that they come from within New York and the places that they talk about within New York City and how they identify with those areas and those boroughs and various other locales within the show. So yeah, like there's just so many examples as to why I think this show works so well within the New York City setting and how well it exemplifies all the things that I love about being from New York. And it just... there's just nothing else like it, and it's a big reason why this show is immensely comforting to me, for sure. Another reason why I love this show is the characters. Now, obviously, we have talked about quite a few of them so far in this. You know, we've mentioned, of course, Goliath, who was, without a doubt, my number one first crush ever when I was a kid in terms of like animated fictional characters. I definitely had a crush on the Beast. Like, let's not get it twisted. But I wasn't quite sure exactly like what I was feeling like that when I was a little kid. But I definitely know for sure that I had a huge crush on Goliath. And I, you know, to this day still do. Keith David's voice does something to me.
Lisa. What a pleasant sight to greet us as we awaken.
No one else can top that except Ron Perlman. The two of them are in a top tier elite category of voice majestic perfection, right? But even outside of that, even when you push the vocal qualities to the side, Goliath is one of those characters that is one of my favorite archetypes in media in general. And what I mean by that is I love a character kind of in the same vein as one of my other favorite characters, Jean-Luc Picard from Star Trek The Next Generation, a character who is so like deeply ingrained in their beliefs and what they believe is right and their morals and all that stuff, that they sometimes are a bit of a grump when there are new things happening around them that they don't understand. But yet, even in their grumpiness and in their defianceness, they will often see what is the right thing to do, even if it's outside the parameters of what they would choose to do. And I think that is just so compelling. And also getting to see him advance and grow as a character, someone who was stubborn in his ways to being someone so accepting and so loving, even though he always was, but he just needed like a key to unlock that. I think it's just so beautiful to see. And Keith David, again, voice aside, just such a great job of portraying this character in so many wacky scenarios that truly test his patience and his resolve in so many ways. So yeah, Goliath is incredible. Then of course, I already mentioned it, but I love Elisa Maza. Elisa Maza not only is like my number one favorite female character in media, like period, end of story, but she is just such a beautiful, again, tribute to New York, but also a beautiful tribute to women who don't fall within a certain kind of parameter that the media kind of puts them in. And I feel like we wouldn't have the archetype of like the detective cop character that, is so prominent in things like NCIS or in, any of those like Chicago shows or 911 if we didn't have Elisa Maza. And obviously, I'm not saying that there wasn't characters like that before, and obviously there were things like Charlie's Angels and stuff like that. But Elisa Maza is such a unique brand of her own kind of woman that I really feel like we owe so much to her existing. And we also owe so much to her existing just because of representation. As a little kid who, didn't see a lot of representation on TV, like at all in terms of strong women, getting to see a character who was so authentically herself at a young age gave me so much license to be myself more than anything else ever had. And I thank so much for Sally Richardson's performance for doing that. And I'm sure that there's so many other people that have like a whole different life experience than me, especially from an Indigenous POC perspective, person of color perspective, that seeing Elisa Maza on screen as a Indigenous mixed race person on TV must have been so incredible as a young child to see that. Because that wasn't happening at all. Even in Batman the Animated Series, we didn't have characters like Elisa Maza. So, kudos to everyone involved in the show, and especially kudos to Sally Richardson for giving Elisa Maza the grace, the beauty, the strength, and everything that makes her such an incredible character. And obviously, of course, the relationship between Goliath and Elisa was my first ever ship when I was little. I remember distinctly drawing them all the time when I was little and just wishing that I could be Elisa, but also wishing I could just be friends with the both of them, and getting to see them live out their romance and play it out on the show was just, I think it was my first inkling of being like, oh, I like seeing these two characters together and I want to see more of that, So like, I adore that. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that had that reaction to them at a young age. But to putting those two, top tier lead characters to the side, let's talk about some more supporting underappreciated characters. Now, obviously, the character I'm about to mention is not underappreciated, but I feel like he is in the span of the lead characters of the show, and that is, of course, Brooklyn.
What's happened? No, this wasn't the plan. I wanted to free his mind, not enslave him.
He is that Raphael from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles coded guy who's been through a lot. He absolutely has been around, the tough trauma block when it comes to the things he's experienced in his life that we even see in the first episode, trying to become friends with humans and trying to expand, his world and getting to know things. He gets kind of bullied and whatnot from the humans. But when we get to see later on in the show, when he ends up in New York and he gets his name, we get to see these moments where Brooklyn, again, evolves to being more confident in himself, but also discovering more things about his personality that maybe he never would have unlocked if he had lived in Scotland. And I think that that's just such a beautiful arc, and especially getting to see him turn into the leader that he eventually does and that he's destined to be in other iterations of the show, in the comics and in some stuff that Greg Weisman has talked about that would have happened to his character. It's just so refreshing to get to see a character that, again, is very Raphael coded, have that sort of really beautiful organic evolution throughout the course of the show, even though it's not a long show, but it's got some really great character moments in that, and I think Brooklyn has some of the best. Like, truly, the thing that I get the most sad about when I think about Brooklyn is that he has so many instances where he desperately wants to be like Goliath and be that stoic romantic hero, but the girls just never give Brooklyn the time of day, which I just don't understand. I know that he's got like a big beak face, but come on, could someone give him a chance? Could Maggie give him a chance? Maggie, if you don't know, is one of the mutant gargoyles from the show, and he definitely has a thing for her, but she has a thing for another character. If you've not seen the show, I will not spoil, but like, yeah. That's a whole thing. And then obviously Brooklyn ends up having a thing for a character who's called Angela, who is also one of my favorite characters in the show. And she is another gargoyle that has a very interesting backstory. Again, the show is 30 years old at this point, but if you don't know, I don't want to spoil it. But she has some interesting ties to other characters within the series. But I wish that everybody gave my boy Brooklyn a chance because he's very romantic, he's very suave, he's very cool, and he absolutely deserves a super cool girlfriend. Now, obviously, in the comics and in the lore of the show, it sounds like he does, but that didn't happen in the show. So, in the context and in the lore of specifically and only the TV show, I wish he would have been given a chance. But I gotta shout out some underrepresented, like legit underrepresented gargoyles. So one of my favorite gargoyle characters of all time, and I'm glad he gets some more moments in the comics, and he gets a little bit more moments in the TV show, is Griff. Now, if you don't know who Griff is from the London clan of the gargoyles that are kind of more inspired by like mythological creatures. So obviously Griff is inspired by a griffin. He's also in a clan / BFFs with gargoyles that are inspired by a unicorn and also by a lion. But I'm sure it's supposed to be like a manticore maybe. But yeah, there's some interesting mixtures and stuff going on with that. But anyway, Griff is so cool. Griff is a hero who saved soldiers in World War II, which is awesome. He also has a super cool vest. But the thing I love the most about Griff, aside from his very, very charming British accent, is that Griff just has like this deep earnestness within him that is so infectious that you can't not love him. Like he just is, the best way I could describe it is if you love Jonathan Bailey from Bridgerton, I feel like he would play Griff. And that's just the vibes that I get from Jonathan Bailey that I love, I get from Griff. And that is just something so enchanting and so charming about him. Then I also have a deep love for the mutants that I kind of mentioned briefly when I was talking about Brooklyn. I feel like there's a whole thing in the Gargoyles world that I just need to talk about just to get off my chest, first of all. And that is, while many of the greatest episodes of the series are animated by a plethora of talented individuals in Japan, in season 2 especially, there was a problem where they had so many episodes that they need to achieve within season 2 that they ended up splitting many of the episodes to different animation studios. And some of them were like, the incredible top tier Japanese animated episodes. But then there would be the ones not animated by those. And they are very clear, like night and day in terms of their quality. And I would say some of them are visually like, okay. But then there are ones that are not. And they just more are the ones that look like Saturday morning cartoons, whereas the ones that were animated by the Japanese studio look like they are like in a class in and of itself, top tier movie quality anime at times. So, that's not great. And because of that, and this is why I bring this up in regards to the mutants, I feel like none of the mutant episodes are of that quality that I'm speaking of. And that is a travesty and a shame that we never get to see Talon or Maggie animated in that quality. We do get to see Fang animated in that style, which is cool, but like, Fang is fine. He's a character that is mute, so you don't really get to know a ton about his personality within the show just because he's mostly used for physical combat reasons and not really to have any sort of like fulfilling character arc other than the episode in which he is animated very well. He gets a little glimmer of a moment, and that episode is future tense, which I'll talk about later. But anyway, the mutants are a fascinating group of characters, and they deserve so much more appreciation and love within the Gargoyles universe, and I wish that they had been in some properly animated episodes. Again, this is a 30-year-old show, so while I'm trying not to spoil everything, I will tell you just in general about the mutants. Basically, they were humans and were genetically altered by a doctor that I think was Dr. Savarius, who is voiced by, of course, the iconic Tim Curry. And they basically changed them from human into gargoyle, but they are not like your typical gargoyles. They're definitely more like feline inspired. So like one of them is a tiger, one of them is a panther. They're basically like gargoyle Thundercats. Okay. Yeah. So like those characters I feel like deserve so much more. And also I have like a whole theory that they were inspired by the Beauty and the Beast TV series because they live like near the subway system and then they help everyone that lives in the subway that's homeless. So like that's interesting. Anyway, could go on a whole rant about that. So I talked a lot about some like good guy characters that I love. And obviously, again, I love the trio. I love Broadway. I love Lexington. I love Hudson. I love Bronx. I love them all. I love them all. But we got to talk about some more antagonistic characters. So I already mentioned him at the beginning, but Cold Stone is kind of in the middle because he is a amalgamation of 3 different gargoyles and their memories and their body parts and stuff like that all put together into one cyborg gargoyle. And the 2 gargoyles that are in his head are there's 2 good guy gargoyles, but then there's 1 bad guy gargoyle, and they consistently kind of battle with each other within the cyborg body, and that's a whole thing. And I find that amazing. Michael Dorn, who you will know as the voice of Worf on Star Trek The Next Generation, does a fantastic job as this character and plays his multifaceted personalities and the different personalities of the gargoyles taking over him in such an interesting way. I just wish there were more episodes of him, but luckily, going back to the whole conversation I just had about like the different animation studios that worked on the episodes, he gets almost every single episode he did is animated to perfection, no notes. He looks so good and it matches so well Michael Dorn's incredible performance. So love that for him. But then in terms of like the whole opposite side of the spectrum in antagonists, we got to talk about Thaylog. Now, for those of you who do not know, Thaylog is actually a clone of Goliath. And yes, you could just say it's Goliath in a different coat of paint, which in many ways it is, especially when it comes to action figures of Thaylog. But Thaylog is a character that is so much... He's so delicious to watch as an antagonist. He does some of the most like nail-biting, awful things to these characters, but he has a legitimate reason and a purpose for it that absolutely makes sense when you think about like all the things that he went through to become who he is. Also, side note, I am also convinced that the people in Japan who were making Pokemon the first movie watched this when making Mewtwo, because Mewtwo and Thaylog have way too much in common. Like, way too much in common. But that's besides the point. Still, I think that Thaylog is wonderful and is such a great excuse to get to hear Keith David play a bad guy, which like rarely ever happens. And he does such a fantastic job of playing against the type that he is known for as Goliath. And I love that evolution in him so much. So yeah, again, there's just so many characters and so many arcs and so many things I could talk about in regards to Gargoyles. There's so many performances I love. I love that Clancy Brown, the man of my dreams in terms of like voice acting, who again kind of falls within that parameter of like Keith David and Rob Perlman, because he's got that deep, gravelly, kind of sexy voice.
Oh, my friend, that's not crazy. Questioning my sanity when I'm in earshot, that's crazy.
But anytime Clancy Brown shows up, regardless of how you think he just sounds like Mr. Krabs, because he is Mr. Krabs, he does a great job. And there's just so many other incredible voice actors that make appearances. And of course, there's Ed Asner, who portrays Hudson in such a wonderfully graceful and purely heroic way that it's so hard not to love him as a character in every moment that he's in throughout the course of the show. There's also Bridget Bacco, who is Angela, aka a character that I mentioned previously, who is very important to the legacy of female representation on the show. And I think she brings such a beautiful, whimsical princess-like quality to Angela, but also makes her incredibly powerful, heroic, and inspiring all at the same time, just like Elisa in so many ways, which makes them great complements of each other throughout the Avalon arc. And also, I already mentioned Tim Curry, but we also had people like Tress MacNeille, Kate Mulgrew, Jonathan Rhys-Davies as Macbeth, and E.J. Day-lin, and just so many voice actors that have changed the landscape of the genre and the art form and whatever, way you want to categorize it. It's something that I feel like not a lot of other animated shows have had this quite of a pantheon of people from the industry just getting to really shine in whatever performance they get the element. I feel like there's not really a lot of animated series except for maybe Batman the animated series and occasionally like a few others like Avatar and such that have gotten to be such a wonderful showcase for these talented actors in this industry that I feel like is often very misunderstood and very kind of pushed to the side and not as appreciated and loved as it should be. So kudos to them for, standing out and giving such incredible performances in an already incredible TV show.
You are trespassing.
Now, before we end this episode, especially for those of you who have never dipped your toes into the world of Gargoyles, I think it is very important to list off some of what are my favorite episodes within the series, and hopefully maybe they are already some of yours or ones that you will get to discover and become some of your favorites of the show. So the first one that I always have to mention is from season 2, and it is called The Mirror.
Scotsmen called them the Fair Folk. The Vikings called them Dark Elves. They are changelings, shapeshifters, creatures of pure magic, and their possessions, like the mirror, are vessels of great power.
And in this episode, Elisa and Goliath are basically, going against Demona, as they always do. But Demona ends up stealing a very important artifact in the world of Gargoyles that is called the Mirror. And essentially, it's like I guess you could say, interdimensional magical item from the world of Avalon that allows people to do a multitude of different magical things with it. And in particular, it is something that was able to bring Puck into the world or allow access for Demona to have access to Puck. And thus results in some very interesting, almost fan fiction-like shenanigans that, to some seasoned viewers, it might seem a little hokey and a little silly, but I feel like in the dynamics of the characters in this show, especially between Elisa and Goliath, it's really interesting to get to see an episode where maybe one becomes human and one becomes a gargoyle and vice versa, flip-flopping throughout the course of the episode. And how does that change their relationship? it's got great animation, so that's a plus. Then another episode that I, similarly in that same vein, am obsessed with and think about all the time is Future Tense, which is also from the Avalon arc in season 2. And by the way, I know I've mentioned the Avalon arc. If you don't know what that is, there was a very specific point in season 2 where we are introduced to a whole slew of new characters where essentially the main group of Elisa, Goliath, and later on Angela and Bronx get to go on this journey where they interact with a bunch of different characters throughout the globe because of the fact that they initially were on Avalon, and the rivers of Avalon send them on a magical world tour, as it's been called in the Gargoyles fandom. So anyway, in the Future Tense episode, the best, easiest way to describe it without spoiling anything is It's a Wonderful Life for Goliath, but apocalyptic. Like, what if New York was turned into an apocalyptic nightmare, and what are all the things that would change in Goliath's life if that were the case? And I love that episode so much because, again, not only does it have like top tier animation and voice acting in it, but it just really adds some interesting thought provoking dynamics into like the usual setup and tropes of the show, and who would be with who would side with who would fight with who, what would they look like at this point in their life. And I just think that the series handles it very well, though it's in a very brutal way for this show, which, while it, for the most part is family friendly, I think this episode definitely like kind of pushes the buttons in the right way of being a little more on the side of being adult. So I would definitely give that episode a shot. Then if we go back to season 1, another episode that I think is fantastic is episode 7, which is called Temptation. Now, this is one of the first episodes that comes after the multi-part Awakening saga, which is, of course, like the essentially the multi-part pilot of the show. And Temptation is where Brooklyn, my baby, my boy, my sweet boy, is, as the title says, tempted to go up against Goliath and side with Demona in the hopes that he will kind of see how humans are not exactly to be trusted in the way that he trusts Elisa. And essentially the reason why I picked this episode, and I think it's great, is not only does it set up Brooklyn's arc of him eventually becoming very much more the leader, the second in command to Goliath, but it also sets up the constant internal conflict that Brooklyn has, where he wants to be the perfect gargoyle in every way possible and be the like stand-up example of his species, right? But at the same time, he also wants to be a part of the human world because that's something that he's curious about, and he's kind of always at war with that. So I think that this episode really, really touches upon that internal conflict really, really well. And it also sets up a really interesting dynamic that actually plays into why I brought up Future Tense, which is the interesting shipping of Brooklyn and Demona. If you watch Future Tense, you'll know why I bring that up. But anyway, so yes, Temptation is a great episode. And then the last episode that I'll talk about, even though, again, there's so many episodes I could go on and on about in regards to Gargoyles, is Eye of the Beholder, which is an episode where Fox is given the Eye of Odin. And I might have mentioned that already. I've been rambling on in the midst of this podcast. I don't remember every single thing I mentioned. But this is the episode where she has the Eye of Odin, and as a gift from David Xanatos, since they're a thing. And when that happened, she ends up turning into a werewolf. And there's some crazy things that go on during Halloween. It's just a great Halloween episode. This is also the iconic episode in the Gargoyles fandom where we get to see Elisa dressed up as Belle from Beauty and the Beast, and her and Goliath, they're dancing in the middle of the East Village. Like, chef's kiss. If you don't already know me, like, I'm going to talk a lot more about my love of Beauty and the Beast media as the show goes on, but like that is like the creme de la creme of like fan fan servicing for me. So yeah, those are just some of my favorite Gargoyles episodes. I'm curious to know if you've watched the show. What are some of your favorites? Tell me them in the comment sections of various places after the show.
I'll always be your friend, Goliath. Same time tomorrow night?
I wouldn't miss it.
Good. Maybe we'll catch a Giants game.
Giants?
So with all that being said, I just want to make sure to say thank you to everyone involved in Gargoyles. This is a show that profoundly changed me and made me a better person and made me learn so much about accepting others, about being open-minded to new experiences in new worlds, having a love for history, a love for the mythology, and so many things about just human culture, and also making me love the place that I was born even more than I already was. So thank you to Greg Wiseman. Thank you to all the incredible people involved in this series. And, happy 30th birthday, Gargoyles. I'm so happy that you exist in this world, and I cannot wait for what the next 30 years brings of this franchise. Here's hoping for the best. And yeah, love the show.
We are defenders of the night. We are Gargoyles.
Thanks for listening to the episode. If you want to follow more of the adventures of It's Really a Podcast, you can follow It's Really a Podcast as one word on Instagram, or you can follow my crazy pastel adventures at It's Really Day-lin on Instagram, Threads, and various other social media platforms. You can also email the show at itsreallydaylin@gmail.com. I also want to give a special shout out to Break Studios from pixbay.com for their awesome upbeat pop intro theme. And also shout out to Vincent from Pixabay for this cute ending track. And if you're someone who's always looking to plan super cute outfits in addition to listening to super cute podcasts, you can check out my outfit planning guide, which is on my Instagram page and my Stan store. Again, look at the bio for more details. Until next time, like I said, stay really you,